Welcome to Beginner Drums. Today we're looking at snare drum stands. Snare drum stands are designed so that you can put your snare drum on a stand, and you do that, you put it on its side like that, and then you find something sharp and metal like a piano tuning key and you hit the side with the wires. Welcome back to Beginner Drums. So today we're just going to have a little chat about snare drum stands. So one of the most popular questions that I get asked by students when they're coming to buy stuff is what sort of snare drum stand should I buy? Because you use them for quite a few different things. Well, at least two different things. Sometimes you put a snare drum on it, or sometimes you'll put a practice pad on it, like that, okay? So you need to know what sort of snare drum stand to get. And you don't always have to spend a fortune on snare drum stands. Let me just switch the snare off on that because it's rattling. I've got a few different ones here. Let me just move this snare drum out the road for a minute. Oops. I'll show you the fairly high-end one first. So this one, it's a really sturdy stand. It's double braced, and that means that there's two little bits of metal coming down the side here instead of one. On a single brace stand like this, you only have one bit of metal coming down the leg. Double brace stands are heavier and stronger and generally more sturdy. Let's start off just by talking about the different parts of the stand. So first of all, when you get a stand, it's probably going to be all folded up and it'll look kind of like that, okay? So the first thing to do is loosen this here for your tilter mechanism. We'll fine tune that later, and then you're going to open up the legs, okay? This isn't rocket science. But how often do I see stands with the legs like that? Or stands with the legs like that? You want the legs at about 45 degrees. The angle here needs to be at about 45 degrees. That applies to pretty much any stand, okay? So don't put them like that, and don't put them like that. The basket. On cheaper snare drum stands like this, Yamaha stands, by the way, are brilliant. I love Yamaha stands. They're really sturdy. They have been through hundreds of gigs without problems. This is a cheaper stand. I'm not going to name and shame the manufacturer. You get what you pay for with snare drum stands. This one is a much cheaper one. One of the biggest disadvantages of this stand is that the basket doesn't go small enough to hold a standard 12-inch practice pad. So when I bring this screw up, there's the highest that screw can go is there. And look, rubbish. So it's fine for a 14-inch snare drum like this. That fits fine, and you get the idea. But 12-inch practice pad won't work on this snare drum stand, okay? So we'll get rid of that. These better ones, these Yamaha stands, handle the 12-inch practice pad no bother. In fact, if we bring this nut all the way up, let's see how small this can go. Look at that. Not that you would ever need the basket to go that small, but just bear that in mind when you're buying a snare drum stand. If you're wanting a smaller drum on it, smaller than a fairly standard 14-inch snare drum, if you want maybe a 13 or a 12 on it, not all snare drum stands will handle that. So these Yamaha ones do absolutely fine. So here's the practice pad on this one. So all I'm going to do is just adjust that nut until it's tight in the basket. Not overly tight, it's not going anywhere. There we go, and that's it. Now for a practice pad, I normally have the tilter so that the drum or the pad is completely horizontal. But for a snare drum, you're probably going to want to angle it, and that kind of depends on your grip, whether or not you're playing in traditional grip, because if you're in traditional grip, you probably have the the basket angled slightly away from you, and if you play more in match grip, you'll probably have it angled slightly towards you. Another little tip for your snare drum stand, I very rarely completely tighten up the basket. I normally just leave it light, just so the drum's sitting on the rubber supports, and that normally does the job absolutely fine. And then I can easily just change it if I need to. It's quicker for setting up and breakdown. You don't need to tighten this tightly like that. I mean, you can technically pick up the whole stand from the drum, but that's completely pointless. It's worth mentioning at this point that there are many other designs of snare basket out there, especially on older kits, but these are by far the most popular. If you're having problems with your particular stand, pop your question in the comments and I'll do my utmost to answer it for you. So just coming back to some of these other stands. So we've got this one, nice high-end Yamaha one. We've got this awful cheap one. Now the other thing is the general construction of the stand. So this, I can feel it's about half the weight of this one. In fact, here. So this is a high-end Yamaha, we're in kilos, versus cheapie. So this one weighs just over 3 kilos. This one, the cheapie, weighs just over 2 kilos, so it's a full kilo lighter. Then we've also got this kind of middle of the range single brace Yamaha one. Hello. Right, pop that on here. This one weighs 2.3 kilos. So the lighter the stand, the more inclined it'll be to wobble about with a snare drum on it. And I find this a lot with this stand. It's you can just feel it's flimsy. If any part of it's going to break, it's probably going to be this bit of the tilter here, because that gets quite a lot of abuse. Whereas on this Yamaha one, you can see the whole tilter mechanism's a much stronger affair. It just feels more sturdy when you're using it. Bear in mind too that better stands give better levels of adjustment. For example, these Yamaha stands give infinite tilter adjustment back and forth, but no adjustment from side to side. The cheaper stand has a cog type tilter and doesn't allow fine adjustments to the angle at all. And who cares about such fine adjustments? Well, anyone who wants to play consistent rim shots for a start. On really high-end stands like the Yamaha SS950, you get a ball clamp tilter, and that gives infinite angle adjustment in every direction. But the trade-off with ball clamps is that they're difficult to memory lock, so it can be hard to get a consistent setup. The other thing to watch out for as well, this little nut here that tightens your cradle, look at this, it's horrible and plasticky. It just feels like it's going to break. Whereas on this one, on the Yamaha one, it just feels really solid. It feels like a really nice solid piece of plastic. And it's the same on the lower end one. It's got exactly the same mechanism for adjusting the basket. So again, here we've got another smaller Yamaha one. This one is designed for the E-kit, and it comfortably will hold a 12-inch pad. I don't think this one will hold a 14-inch snare drum though, because it's not designed for one. So there you go. So a 14-inch snare drum won't fit in that basket. So when you're buying a snare drum stand, you need to check what size the basket will adjust to, both in terms of how far, what's the smallest drum it can handle, and what's the biggest drum it can handle. And just bear that in mind when you're buying one. The only other adjustment you've got on it really is this one, which is for the height of the drum. So there you go, snare drum stands in a nutshell. Don't forget to click subscribe and see you next time.